Christmas morning, 2024, I woke up on the living room couch with a crick in my neck and the sound of my grandchildren unwrapping presents in the room I'd been sleeping in for 3 days. The same room that used to be my guest bedroom until my son decided his family needed more space during their holiday visit. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 72 years old, and I've been a widow for 8 years. I raised 3 children as a single mother after my husband died, worked 2 jobs to put them through college, and saved every penny to ensure my family would be financially secure. "Grandma, why are you sleeping out here?" my 8-year-old granddaughter Emma asked innocently. Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law Jessica quickly ushered her away. "Grandma likes the couch, sweetie. It's more comfortable for her old bones." I had been relegated to sleeping on my own living room couch in my own house because my son's family needed the guest room. The master bedroom was too small for all their luggage, and apparently a 72-year-old woman's comfort didn't matter during the most important holiday of the year. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. If you've ever been treated like a guest in your own home by your own family, stay with me. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what they did to me. My name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and the mother of 3 grown children. I've lived in the same house for 45 years, the house where I raised my kids after my husband Robert died in a construction accident when our youngest was only 8. I worked 2 jobs for 15 years, teaching during the day and cleaning offices at night to keep our family afloat and put all 3 children through college. I never remarried, never took a vacation, never bought anything for myself that wasn't absolutely necessary. Every decision I made was about my children's future and security. My oldest son, Michael, is now 43, married to Jessica, and they have 2 kids, Emma, 8, and Tommy, 6. My daughter Sarah lives across the country with her family, and my youngest son David is a bachelor who travels constantly for work. Michael is the only one who lives nearby, which made him the natural choice to be involved in my day-to-day life as I aged. The problem started 3 years ago when Michael got promoted to regional manager at his company. Suddenly, our family dynamic shifted from mutual respect to what felt like a parent-child relationship, except I was treated like the child. Michael and Jessica were always comfortable, but this promotion came with a significant salary increase and apparently a significant attitude adjustment. They moved to a larger house in an upscale neighborhood, enrolled the kids in private school, and began living a lifestyle that seemed to require constant financial support from others, namely me. I had been widowed for 8 years, and while I wasn't wealthy, I was comfortable. Robert's life insurance, our paid-off house, and my teacher's pension provided enough for me to live well and help my family when needed. I had always been generous with my children, believing that my role as a mother didn't end when they became adults. At first, the requests were reasonable. "Mom, could you help with Emma's dance lessons? They're really expensive, but she loves it so much." Or, "Would you mind contributing to Tommy's baseball equipment? The league requires specific gear." I was happy to help. Being able to support my grandchildren's activities and education felt like a privilege, a way to stay involved in their lives and contribute to their happiness and development. But the requests grew larger and more frequent. Private school tuition supplements, family vacation contributions, down payment help for their new car. Each request came with emotional manipulation disguised as family obligation. "We really need your help, Mom. You know we wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. The kids are counting on this." The most significant request came 2 years ago: college funds for both grandchildren. Emma was only 6 and Tommy was 4, but Michael and Jessica were concerned about the rising cost of education. "We want to make sure they have the best opportunities," Jessica explained during a family dinner. "But with everything else we're paying for, we just can't save enough for their college education." They asked me to contribute $100,000 to each child's college fund, $200,000 total. It was a substantial portion of my savings, but they presented it as an investment in my grandchildren's future, a way to ensure they wouldn't be burdened with student loans. "Think about it, Mom," Michael said. "You'd be giving them the gift of a debt-free education. Isn't that what you'd want for your grandchildren?" I agreed, liquidating a significant portion of my retirement investments to fund their college accounts. The money was placed in 529 education savings plans, with Michael and Jessica as the account holders and beneficiaries since the children were minors. But something changed after I made that contribution. Instead of gratitude, I sensed entitlement. Instead of appreciation, I felt taken for granted. Michael and Jessica began treating my financial support not as generous gifts, but as expected contributions to their lifestyle. The shift became obvious during family gatherings. I was no longer consulted about major decisions affecting the grandchildren. My opinions about their education, activities, and upbringing were dismissed as old-fashioned or out of touch. When I tried to offer advice based on my 40 years of teaching experience, Jessica would smile condescendingly and say, "That's sweet, Maggie, but things are different now." They began making assumptions about my availability and resources. I was expected to babysit whenever they needed childcare, regardless of my own plans. I was expected to contribute to every school fundraiser, every sports team fee, every birthday party expense. "You don't mind, do you, Mom?" became Micro's standard phrase when asking for money or favors. It wasn't really a question. It was a statement disguised as a request. The final straw came this past Christmas. Michael called me in November to inform me that they would be spending Christmas week at my house, as they had for the past several years. But this time there was a new development. "We're bringing Jessica's parents too," he announced. "They're flying in from Florida, and we thought it would be nice for all the grandparents to spend Christmas together." I was pleased about the idea of meeting Jessica's parents, whom I'd only met briefly at their wedding. But when I asked about sleeping arrangements, Michael's response shocked me. "Well, Jessica's parents will need the master bedroom since they're older and have mobility issues. You can take the guest room with the kids. You'll sleep on the couch in the living room. It's just for a few nights." I was stunned. In my own house, I was being relegated to the couch so that guests could have the bedrooms? When I protested, Michael became defensive. "Mom, you're being selfish. Jessica's parents are in their 80s and they need a comfortable bed. You're younger and more flexible. Besides, it's just temporary." I was 72 years old with arthritis and chronic back pain, but apparently I was younger and more flexible than people who were only 8 years older than me. But I agreed, not wanting to cause conflict during the holidays. I told myself it was just a few nights, that family harmony was more important than my comfort. I had no idea how much worse it was going to get. Christmas week arrived, and with it came the most humiliating experience of my 72 years on Earth. Jessica's parents, Harold and Dolores, were lovely people, but the way my own family treated me in front of them was devastating. From the moment they arrived, I was relegated to the role of housekeeper in my own home. While Harold and Dolores were treated like honored guests, I was expected to cook, clean, serve meals, and manage the household while sleeping on the living room couch. "Mom, could you make your famous Christmas cookies?" Jessica asked on their first day. "Harold and Dolores would love to try them." "Of course," I replied, happy to contribute to the holiday atmosphere. But as I spent hours in the kitchen baking, I noticed that no one offered to help. Jessica sat in the living room chatting with her parents while Michael played video games with the children. When I emerged with fresh cookies, Jessica took the credit. "I had Maggie make these. She's so good at baking." Had Maggie make these, as if I were her employee rather than Michael's mother. The sleeping arrangement was even worse than I had anticipated. The living room couch was old and uncomfortable, and with the Christmas tree presents and holiday decorations, there was barely enough space for me to stretch out. I spent 3 nights tossing and turning, my back aching, my neck stiff, listening to the sounds of my family sleeping comfortably in the bedrooms upstairs. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional pain of being treated like an inconvenience in my own home. On Christmas Eve, I overheard a conversation that broke my heart. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Jessica and her mother were talking in the dining room, unaware that I could hear them. "It's so generous of you to let Maggie stay here," Dolores said. "Well, we don't really have a choice. Michael feels obligated to take care of her, but honestly, it's becoming a burden. She's getting older and more demanding, and we have our own family to think about." "What do you mean?" Dolores asked. "She expects us to include her in everything, and she's always offering opinions about how we should raise the kids. Plus, she's sitting on all this money that should really be going to Emma and Tommy's future, but she acts like every dollar is precious." I stood frozen in the kitchen, holding a wooden spoon, as my daughter-in-law described me as a burden to her mother. The woman who had contributed $200,000 to her children's education was being characterized as selfish and demanding. "Maybe it's time to start looking into assisted living facilities," Jessica continued. "Michael won't hear of it now, but eventually she's going to need more care than we can provide." Assisted living facilities. They were already planning to warehouse me somewhere so I wouldn't be an inconvenience to their lives. Christmas morning was the final humiliation. I woke up on the couch, as I had for 3 nights, to find the family opening presents in the living room around me. Emma asked innocently why I was sleeping there, and Jessica's dismissive response about my old bones being more comfortable on the couch was delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But what happened next was even worse. As the family opened presents, I realized that I had been completely excluded from the gift-giving ceremony. Jessica's parents had brought presents for everyone, including me, a lovely scarf and some hand lotion. Michael and Jessica had gifts for Harold and Dolores, expensive items that I recognized as being far beyond their usual budget. But there were no gifts from Michael's family to me. Nothing. Not even a card. When I mentioned it quietly to Michael, he looked embarrassed and mumbled something about being so busy with the holidays that they had forgotten. Forgotten. Their mother and grandmother, who had funded their children's college education and spent 3 days cooking and cleaning for their holiday celebration, had been forgotten. That afternoon, while everyone napped or played with new toys, I sat on the couch that had been my bed for 3 nights and made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. Then I navigated to the 529 education savings plans, where my $200,000 contribution was sitting earning interest for Emma and Tommy's future college expenses. The accounts were in Michael and Jessica's names, but as the contributor, I had certain rights. More importantly, I had kept detailed records of every deposit I had made, including the large initial contributions and the smaller monthly additions I had been making since the accounts were opened. I spent the next hour researching my options. What I discovered was that while I couldn't directly withdraw the money from the 529 plans, I could stop making contributions, and I could also make a case for financial elder abuse if I could prove that my contributions had been obtained through manipulation or coercion. But I had a better idea. I had been making monthly contributions to those college funds for 2 years, $500 per month per child, totaling $1,000 monthly. Over the remaining years until they reached college age, those contributions would have totaled another $120,000. Instead of continuing those contributions, I was going to redirect that money somewhere else, somewhere that would actually appreciate my generosity. I spent the Christmas afternoon researching children's charities, organizations that helped underprivileged kids get educational opportunities, groups that supported elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. By the time my family woke up from their post-Christmas naps, I had made a decision that felt like the first truly empowering choice I had made in years. I was going to stop funding the education of children whose parents treated me like hired help, and start funding the education of children who would actually benefit from the opportunity. The day after Christmas, as my family packed up their belongings and prepared to return to their comfortable lives, I made a decision that would alter the course of all our relationships. I was done being taken for granted, done being treated like a convenient ATM, and done sacrificing my dignity for people who saw my generosity as an entitlement rather than a gift. After everyone left, I sat in my quiet house and took stock of what had happened. For 3 days, I had been treated like a servant in my own home. I had cooked, cleaned, and provided hospitality while sleeping on an uncomfortable couch because my comfort was less important than that of people I barely knew. But more than the physical discomfort, I was devastated by the emotional betrayal. The conversation I had overheard between Jessica and her mother revealed how my own family really saw me as a burden, an inconvenience, someone whose money was welcome but whose presence was merely tolerated. I spent the next week in deep reflection, reviewing not just the Christmas incident, but the entire pattern of my relationship with Michael and Jessica over the past 3 years. What I saw was a gradual erosion of respect, a systematic devaluation of my contributions, and an increasing sense of entitlement to my resources. The $200,000 I had contributed to my grandchildren's college funds represented years of careful saving, the liquidation of investments I had planned to use for my own security in old age. I had given that money gladly, believing that it was an investment in my grandchildren's future and a way to strengthen family bonds. Instead, it had become a weapon used against me. Because I had demonstrated my willingness to make large financial contributions, Michael and Jessica now expected ongoing support for every aspect of their lifestyle. My generosity had been interpreted as weakness, my love as obligation. I realized that I had been enabling their entitled behavior by continuing to say yes to every request, by prioritizing their comfort over my own, by accepting treatment that I would never tolerate from strangers. The decision to redirect my future contributions came to me gradually, then all at once. I was scheduled to make my monthly $1,000 contribution to the college funds on January 1st, as I had been doing for the past 2 years. Instead, I was going to send that money somewhere else. I spent several days researching charitable organizations that aligned with my values and would make good use of my contributions. I found 3 that particularly appealed to me: a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from low-income families, a program that provided educational support for children in foster care, and an organization that helped elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. These organizations served people who would genuinely appreciate support, who understood that generosity was a gift rather than an obligation, who would use the resources to improve their lives rather than fund an entitled lifestyle. On January 1st, instead of transferring $1,000 to Emma and Tommy's college funds, I made 3 donations of $333.33 each to my chosen charities. It felt like the most empowering financial decision I had made in years. But I didn't stop there. I also wrote a letter to Michael and Jessica, explaining my decision and the reasons behind it. I wanted them to understand that their treatment of me had consequences, that respect and gratitude were not optional components of family relationships. Dear Michael and Jessica, I began, I am writing to inform you of some changes I am making to my financial planning and family involvement. After careful consideration of our relationship over the past several years, and particularly after the events of this Christmas, I have decided to discontinue my monthly contributions to Emma and Tommy's college funds. The $1,000 per month that I have been contributing will instead be donated to charitable organizations that serve children and elderly people who would genuinely appreciate the support. This decision is not made in anger, but rather in recognition that my generosity has been taken for granted and my presence in your lives has been treated as an inconvenience rather than a blessing. The Christmas week experience, during which I was relegated to sleeping on my own living room couch while being expected to serve as housekeeper and cook, was the final indication that our family dynamic has become unhealthy and unsustainable. I will always love Emma and Tommy, and the $200,000 I have already contributed to their education remains available for that purpose. But I will not continue to fund the lifestyle of people who treat me with disrespect and view my contributions as entitlements rather than gifts. I hope that in time, you will come to understand that family relationships require mutual respect, gratitude, and consideration. Until that understanding develops, I will be limiting my involvement in your lives and redirecting my resources towards people and organizations that value what I have to offer. With love, but firm boundaries. Mom. I mailed the letter on January 3rd and felt a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Robert's death, I was making decisions based on my own needs and values, rather than other people's expectations and demands. The response came quickly and was exactly what I expected. Michael called me 2 days after receiving the letter, his voice a mixture of shock, anger, and panic. "Mom, what is this letter about? You can't just stop contributing to the kids' college funds. We've been counting on that money." "You've been counting on money that was never guaranteed. Those contributions were gifts, not obligations. And gifts can be redirected when the recipients demonstrate that they don't value the giver. This is about Christmas, isn't it? You're being petty about the sleeping arrangements? This is about respect, Michael. It's about being treated like a valued family member rather than a convenient resource. It's about recognizing that my comfort, dignity, and feelings matter too." The conversation deteriorated from there, with Michael alternating between guilt trips. "What about Emma and Tommy's future?" Threats. "You're going to regret this when you need our help," and attempts at manipulation. "I thought you loved your grandchildren." But I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. The woman who had spent 3 years saying yes to every request, accepting every slight, and prioritizing everyone else's needs over her own, had finally learned to say no. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where my worth wasn't measured by my willingness to be taken advantage of, and my love wasn't demonstrated through financial contributions to people who didn't appreciate them. 6 months after I stopped contributing to my grandchildren's college funds and redirected that money to charity, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. The decision to establish boundaries with Michael and Jessica had created space for me to rediscover who I was, beyond my role as the family ATM. The immediate aftermath of my letter had been difficult. Michael and Jessica had tried every manipulation tactic in their arsenal: guilt, anger, threats, and even attempts to use the grandchildren as emotional leverage. Emma had called me crying, saying she was worried about college, though I suspected she had been coached by her parents. "Grandma, Mommy says you don't want to help with my education anymore," she sobbed into the phone. "Sweetheart, there's already money set aside for your college," I explained gently. "Grandma just decided to help some other children too, children who don't have anyone else to help them. But Mommy says we might not have enough." I realized then that Michael and Jessica were using my decision as an opportunity to create financial anxiety in their children, probably hoping the emotional pressure would force me to resume my contributions. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. I would not allow myself to be manipulated through my grandchildren's fears, especially fears that were being artificially created by their parents. The $1,000 per month that I had been contributing to college funds was now going to 3 organizations that sent me regular updates about how the money was being used. I received thank you letters from scholarship recipients, photos of foster children participating in educational programs, and reports about elderly people receiving support services. For the first time in years, I could see the direct impact of my generosity. Instead of funding a lifestyle I wasn't welcome to share,
I was creating opportunities for people who genuinely needed and appreciated help. But the most significant change was in how I spent my time and energy. Without the constant demands and expectations from Michael's family, I had space to pursue interests and activities that had been neglected for years. I started volunteering at the local elementary school, where I had taught for 30 years. The current teachers welcomed my experience and expertise, and I found great satisfaction in helping struggling students with reading and math. The children were delighted to have an extra adult who paid attention to them, and their genuine appreciation was a stark contrast to the entitled attitude I had grown accustomed to from my own family. I also joined a book club at the library, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for when I was constantly available for babysitting and family obligations. The women in the group were intelligent, interesting, and became genuine friends who valued my opinions and enjoyed my company. Most surprisingly, I started dating. Harold, a widower I met at the book club, asked me to dinner after we had spent several weeks discussing literature and discovering shared interests. At 72, I had assumed that romantic companionship was behind me, but Harold was kind, intellectually stimulating, and treated me with the respect and consideration that had been missing from my family relationships. "You seem different from when I first met you," Harold observed during one of our dinner dates. "More confident, more at peace with yourself." He was right. Establishing boundaries with Michael and Jessica had been painful, but it had also been liberating. I was no longer walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate their needs and avoid their disapproval. I was making decisions based on my own values and preferences, and the result was a sense of authenticity I hadn't felt in years. The financial impact of redirecting my monthly contributions was also positive. Instead of depleting my retirement savings to fund someone else's lifestyle, I was able to rebuild my financial security while still being generous to causes I cared about. I consulted with a financial advisor who helped me create a more sustainable giving plan. Instead of making large, emotionally driven contributions that left me vulnerable, I established a structured charitable giving budget that allowed me to support multiple organizations while maintaining my own financial stability. "You're in a much stronger position now, Maggie. You're giving strategically rather than reactively, and you're maintaining control over your resources." The contrast with my previous financial relationship with Michael's family was stark. Instead of being pressured into large contributions with emotional manipulation, I was making thoughtful decisions about how to use my money in ways that aligned with my values. The most unexpected development was the impact my decision had on my other children. Sarah, my daughter who lived across the country, called me after hearing about the situation from Michael. "Mom, I had no idea how Michael and Jessica were treating you," she said. "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." David, my youngest son, was even more supportive. "I always thought there was something off about how they expected you to fund their lifestyle," he told me during a visit. "You deserve better than that." Both Sarah and David made efforts to increase their contact with me, perhaps recognizing that they had been taking our relationship for granted while Michael monopolized my attention and resources. I also began receiving support from unexpected sources. Several of my former teaching colleagues reached out after hearing about my situation through the volunteer network at school. Many of them shared similar stories about adult children who had become entitled and demanding. "It's an epidemic," one friend told me. "Adult children who think their parents owe them financial support indefinitely, regardless of how they treat them." These conversations helped me understand that my experience wasn't unique, and that establishing boundaries was not only appropriate but necessary for maintaining healthy family relationships. A year after making my decision, I received a call from Jessica that surprised me. She was crying and seemed genuinely distressed. "Maggie, I need to apologize," she said. "I've been thinking about how we treated you, especially during Christmas, and I'm ashamed of our behavior." "What's brought this on?" I asked, curious about the sudden change in attitude. "My mother has been staying with us for the past month while she recovers from surgery. Jessica explained, and I realized how difficult it is to have an extra person in the house, how much work it creates, and how ungrateful I was for everything you did for us. It was a start, but I wasn't ready to resume the old patterns. I appreciate your apology, Jessica, but an apology without changed behavior isn't meaningful. I understand, she said. I just wanted you to know that I recognize how wrong we were. The conversation was cordial, but brief. I had learned that words were easy, but consistent, respectful treatment was what mattered. I was willing to rebuild our relationship, but it would have to be on terms that honored my dignity and worth. The woman who had once slept on her own living room couch to accommodate ungrateful family members was now sleeping peacefully in her own bed, surrounded by people who valued her presence and appreciated her generosity.
2 years after I donated my grandchildren's college fund contributions to charity, I stood in the community center auditorium, addressing a room full of elderly people who had gathered for a workshop on setting boundaries with adult children. I had become an unexpected advocate for seniors who were being financially exploited or emotionally manipulated by their own families. The transformation had been gradual but profound. What started as a personal decision to redirect my charitable giving had evolved into a mission to help other elderly people recognize and address similar patterns of abuse and entitlement in their own families. The workshop series had grown from a small support group I had started at the Senior Center to a monthly program that drew attendees from across the region. I shared my story not for sympathy, but as an example of how it was possible to reclaim your dignity and autonomy even late in life. How many of you have been told that you're being selfish for wanting to maintain control over your own resources? I asked the audience. Nearly every hand went up. How many have been made to feel guilty for having needs and preferences of your own? Again, most hands were raised. And how many have been treated like an ATM by family members who show up when they need money but are too busy for you otherwise? This time, the response was accompanied by nods and murmurs of recognition. These workshops had become some of the most meaningful work of my life. I was helping people who had spent decades putting everyone else's needs first to recognize that they deserved respect, consideration, and appreciation from their adult children. The success of the program had grown from a small support group I had started at the Senior Center to a monthly program that drew attendees from across the region. I shared my story not for sympathy, but as an example of how it was possible to reclaim your dignity and autonomy, even late in life. My personal life had flourished beyond anything I had imagined possible at 74. Harold and I had been together for nearly 2 years, and our relationship had brought joy, companionship, and mutual respect back into my life. We traveled together, shared intellectual interests, and supported each other's independence while enjoying our partnership. "You've taught me that it's never too late to start over," Harold told me as we walked through the botanical gardens on a sunny Saturday afternoon. "I was resigned to spending my remaining years alone, but you've shown me that life can still hold surprises and happiness." We had even discussed marriage, though we were in no hurry. Both of us had learned the value of taking relationships slowly and ensuring that they were built on solid foundations of respect and compatibility. The financial decisions I had made continued to pay dividends, both literally and figuratively. The charitable organizations I supported sent regular updates about the impact of my contributions. I had helped fund scholarships for 12 first-generation college students, supported educational programs for dozens of foster children, and contributed to services that had assisted over 50 elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. Each thank you letter and progress report reminded me that my money was being used to create real opportunities and solve genuine problems, rather than funding the entitled lifestyle of people who took my generosity for granted. My relationship with Michael and Jessica had evolved into something more honest, if less frequent. The dramatic confrontation and subsequent boundary setting had forced them to recognize that their treatment of me had been unacceptable, and while they hadn't fully acknowledged the extent of their behavior, they had made some efforts to improve. Michael called me monthly now, actually asking about my life and interests, rather than just updating me on their needs and expenses.
Jessica had apologized several more times and seemed genuinely remorseful about the Christmas incident and the pattern of entitlement that had preceded it. Most importantly, they had stopped asking for money. Whether this was due to genuine respect for my boundaries or simply recognition that their tactics were no longer effective, the result was a more balanced relationship where conversations weren't dominated by requests for financial support. My grandchildren, now 10 and 8, had adjusted to the new dynamic as well. Emma and Tommy still visited occasionally, and I enjoyed spending time with them, but the visits were more natural and less fraught with underlying tensions about money and expectations. "Grandma, why do you help so many other kids with school?" Emma asked during one visit, having overheard a phone conversation I had with one of my scholarship recipients. "Because education is important, and not every child has family who can help them," I explained. "I'm lucky to be able to make a difference in their lives." "But what about our college money?" "You have college money, sweetheart, and if you work hard in school and value your education, that money will be there when you need it." I was teaching them, indirectly, that generosity was about helping those who needed it most, not about funding the lifestyle preferences of people who already had advantages. The most unexpected development had been the impact my story had on other families. Several people who attended my workshops had gone home and had difficult but necessary conversations with their own adult children about boundaries, respect, and mutual consideration. One woman, Dorothy, had been giving her son $2,000 per month to supplement his income while he figured out his career path at age 35. After attending my workshop, she had given him 6 months' notice that the payments would end, and he would need to become financially independent. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," she told me. But 6 months later, he had found a full-time job and was actually thanking me for pushing him to become self-sufficient. Another attendee, Robert, had been providing free childcare for his daughter's family 5 days a week while she and her husband both worked full-time. He had never been paid or even thanked for this service, and his own social life and health had suffered from the demanding schedule. After our discussion about the difference between helping and enabling, he had negotiated a more reasonable arrangement where he provided childcare 2 days a week and was compensated for his time. His daughter had initially been angry, but eventually recognized that her father's time and energy had value. These stories reminded me that my experience, while painful, had led to something positive and meaningful. I was helping other people recognize their own worth and establish healthier relationships with their adult children. The book I was writing about my experience was nearly complete. The ATM Grandma, How I Stopped Funding Entitlement and Started Living My Life, would be published by a small press that specialized in books for seniors. While I didn't expect it to become a bestseller, I hoped it would reach people who needed to hear that it was never too late to reclaim your dignity and autonomy. As I looked out at the audience during that workshop, I saw faces that reflected my own journey. People who had given so much of themselves that they had forgotten their own worth, who had been so focused on being needed that they had accepted being taken for granted. You are not obligated to fund other people's lifestyle choices. You are not required to accept disrespectful treatment in exchange for family relationships. And you are never too old to start putting your own needs and dignity first. The applause that followed wasn't just appreciation for my words. It was recognition of truth that many of them had been afraid to acknowledge. They were ready to stop being ATMs and start being people whose worth wasn't measured by their willingness to be exploited. The woman who had once slept on her own couch to avoid family conflict was now standing confidently in front of audiences, teaching others how to avoid making the same mistakes she had made. 3 years after I had donated my grandchildren's college fund contributions to charity, I stopped into the grocery store and encountered Jessica in the produce section. It was the first time we had seen each other in person since that devastating Christmas, and the meeting was as awkward as I had expected it would be. "Maggie," she said, looking genuinely surprised to see me. "How are you?" "I'm well, thank you," I replied, continuing to select apples while maintaining a polite but distant demeanor. "You look different, happier." I was different. The past 3 years had been transformative in ways that were probably visible to anyone who had known me during my period of family servitude. I was more confident, more at peace with myself, and no longer carried the constant tension of trying to anticipate and meet other people's expectations. I am happier, I confirmed. I've been keeping busy with volunteer work and spending time with friends. You've heard about your workshops, she said. Michael mentioned that you've been speaking at senior centers on family relationships. There was something in her tone that suggested she knew exactly what those workshops were about, and that my story had become a cautionary tale in their social circle. I've been helping other seniors navigate difficult family dynamics, I said carefully. It's been very rewarding work. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, both of us aware that there were significant unresolved issues between us, but neither knew how to address them in a grocery store encounter. Maggie, I've been wanting to talk to you, Jessica said finally, about what happened, about how we treated you. I know my apologies over the phone weren't enough. What's brought this on? I asked, curious about her motivation for wanting to have this conversation now. Honestly, my mother has been living with us for the past 6 months while she recovers from a stroke, and experiencing what it's like to have an elderly family member in the house has made me realize how terrible we were to you. I waited for her to continue, not offering reassurance or absolution. She's not as easy to care for as you were, she continued. She's demanding, critical, and seems to expect us to cater to her every need. And I keep thinking about how patient and helpful you always were.
And how we repaid that kindness with disrespect and entitlement. I see, I said neutrally. I also want you to know that we've been struggling financially since you stopped contributing to the college funds, she admitted. We have gotten so used to that extra money that we hadn't realized how dependent we had become on your generosity. This confession was interesting, but not surprising. I had suspected that my monthly contributions had been integrated into their budget in ways that went beyond college savings. We had to take out a loan to cover some expenses, and Michael's been working overtime to make up the difference. It's been a wake-up call about how much we were taking advantage of your support. I'm sorry to hear you're having financial difficulties, I said, and I meant it. But I hope you understand why I made the decision to redirect my charitable giving. I do understand, she said quickly, and I'm not asking you to resume the contributions. I just wanted you to know that we recognize how wrong we were, and that we're trying to be more responsible and self-sufficient. That's good to hear, I replied. I also wanted to ask if there is any possibility of rebuilding our relationship, she said. Not the old relationship where we took advantage of you, but something healthier and more respectful. I considered her request carefully. The past 3 years had taught me the importance of being cautious about re-engaging with people who had demonstrated a pattern of exploitative behavior. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship, I said finally, but it would have to be based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation, not on financial expectations or family obligations. I understand, she said quickly, and I want you to know that the kids miss you. Emma asks about you all the time, and Tommy still talks about the stories you used to tell him. This was the emotional manipulation I had learned to recognize and resist, using my love for my grandchildren to pressure me into resuming a relationship that had been harmful to my well-being. I miss them too, I said honestly, but missing someone doesn't mean accepting unacceptable treatment from their parents. You're right, she said, looking chastened. I just thought you should know that they love you and remember all the good times you shared. I'm glad to hear that, I replied. And I hope someday we can create new good times based on a healthier family dynamic. We parted cordially, but I left the encounter feeling conflicted. Part of me wanted to believe that Jessica's apologies were genuine and that meaningful change was possible, but a larger part of me recognized that people often express remorse when they were facing consequences for their behavior, only to revert to old patterns once the pressure was removed. Over the following weeks, I found myself thinking about the encounter and what it might mean for my relationship with Michael's family. I discussed it with Harold, who had become my trusted confidant and advisor on family matters. What do you think motivated her to approach you? I think she's dealing with her own difficult family situation and has gained some perspective on how she treated me, I said.
But I also think she's hoping to rebuild the relationship because they're struggling financially without my contributions. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Harold pointed out. She might genuinely regret her behavior while also hoping to restore access to your financial support. He was right, and his observation helped me clarify my own feelings about the situation. I was willing to consider rebuilding the relationship, but only if it was based on genuine respect and appreciation, rather than financial expectations or family obligations. A few days later, Michael called me to follow up on Jessica's grocery store encounter. His approach was more direct than his wife's had been. "Mom, Jessica told me she talked to you about rebuilding our relationship. I want you to know that I support that and that I recognize how badly we treated you." "I appreciate that, Michael," I said. "I also want you to know that we're not asking for money," he continued. "We've learned to live within our means, and we understand that your financial support was a privilege, not a right." "That's an important recognition," I agreed. "Would you be willing to have dinner with us sometime, just to spend time together as a family, without any agenda or expectations?" I considered his invitation carefully. A family dinner would be a low-stakes way to test whether their attitudes had genuinely changed, and it would allow me to see my grandchildren in a more natural setting. "I'd be willing to try that," I said. "But I want to be clear that this is an experiment in rebuilding trust, not a return to the old dynamic." "Understood. And Mom, thank you for being open to giving us another chance." As I hung up the phone, I reflected on how much had changed since that humiliating Christmas 3 years earlier. The woman who had slept on her own couch to avoid family conflict was now setting terms for re-engagement that prioritized her own dignity and well-being. I was willing to explore the possibility of rebuilding these relationships, but only on terms that honored the lessons I had learned about my own worth and the importance of mutual respect in family dynamics. 5 years after that humiliating Christmas when I slept on my own couch, I sat in my dining room hosting a holiday dinner that looked nothing like the family gatherings of the past. Around my table were Harold, my partner of 3 years, Dorothy, and Robert, friends from my boundary-setting workshops who had become like family, and Maria, a scholarship recipient I had been mentoring who was now a sophomore in college. The absence of Michael's family was noticeable but not painful. We had attempted to rebuild our relationship over the past 2 years, with mixed results. While they had stopped asking for money and treated me with more respect during our occasional visits, something fundamental had been broken that couldn't be fully repaired. The dinner conversation was lively and meaningful. Maria was sharing her excitement about her studies and social work, inspired partly by my advocacy work with seniors. Dorothy was describing her son's recent promotion and how their relationship had improved since she had established financial boundaries. Robert was planning a trip to visit his daughter, who now paid him for babysitting and treated his time as valuable. "This feels like what family dinner should be," Harold observed as we cleared the dishes. "People who genuinely enjoy each other's company and appreciate what everyone brings to the table." He was right. The people around my table that evening were there because they wanted to be, not because of obligation or expectation. The conversation was natural and engaging, not strained by underlying tensions about money or unmet expectations. The contrast with my previous family dynamics was stark. For years, I had hosted holiday gatherings where I did all the work while being taken for granted, where my contributions were expected rather than appreciated, where my comfort was sacrificed for others' convenience. Now, I was surrounded by people who valued my presence, who contributed to the meal preparation and cleanup, who treated me as an equal rather than a resource to be exploited. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The process of rebuilding my life and relationships had taken years of conscious effort, boundary setting, and learning to value myself as much as I valued others. My advocacy work had expanded beyond the local workshops to include consulting with elder law attorneys, speaking at conferences on senior rights, and serving on the board of a nonprofit organization that addressed financial abuse of elderly people. The book I had written about my experience had been published and was being used in social work training programs and elder care facilities. While it hadn't become a bestseller, it had reached the people who needed to read it, and I regularly received letters from readers who had found the courage to address similar situations in their own families. One letter in particular had moved me to tears. It was from a woman whose adult children had been pressuring her to sell her house and move into a smaller apartment so they could inherit the proceeds while she was still alive. After reading my book, she had refused their demands and instead used the equity in her home to fund a scholarship program at her local community college. "You taught me that I don't owe my children my security," she wrote. "I can be generous while still protecting myself." These responses reminded me that my painful experience had served a purpose beyond my own growth and healing. I was helping other people recognize their worth and establish healthier relationships with their adult children. My relationship with my grandchildren had evolved into something more authentic and meaningful. Emma and Tommy, now 13 and 11, visited me occasionally, but the visits were based on genuine affection rather than parental expectations or financial incentives. Emma had become particularly interested in my advocacy work and had even attended one of my workshops, sitting quietly in the back while I spoke about the importance of treating elderly family members with respect and dignity. "Grandma, I'm sorry about how my parents treated you. I didn't understand what was happening when I was little, but I understand now." Her apology meant more to me than all of their parents' expressions of regret combined, because it came from genuine understanding rather than guilt or self-interest. Tommy had developed an interest in the scholarship recipients I mentored, often asking about their studies and their goals. He seemed to understand that my charitable giving was helping people who needed opportunities, and he expressed pride in having a grandmother who made a difference in other people's lives. "When I grow up, I want to help people too, like you do," he told me during one visit. These conversations gave me hope that the next generation would understand the difference between entitlement and gratitude, between taking advantage of family generosity and appreciating it. My financial situation had stabilized in ways that exceeded my expectations. By redirecting my charitable giving to organizations that use the money effectively, and by establishing clear boundaries around family financial support, I had been able to rebuild my retirement savings, while still being generous to causes I cared about. The financial advisor I had been working with had helped me create a comprehensive plan that would ensure my security throughout my remaining years, while also allowing for continued charitable giving and the possibility of leaving meaningful bequests to organizations that aligned with my values. "You're in a much stronger position now than you were 5 years ago," she told me during our annual review. "You've learned to give strategically rather than emotionally, and you've protected yourself from financial exploitation." The most significant change, however, has been internal. I have developed an unshakable sense of my own worth that isn't dependent on other people's approval or appreciation. I know that I am valuable not because of what I can provide for others, but because of who I am as a person. This confidence has transformed every aspect of my life. My relationship with Harold is based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not on need or convenience. My friendships are authentic and reciprocal. My advocacy work is effective because it comes from a place of strength rather than victimhood. As I looked around my dinner table that evening, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The humiliation and betrayal I had experienced 5 years earlier had been devastating, but it had also been the catalyst for discovering my own strength and creating a life that was more authentic and fulfilling than anything I had known before. The woman who had once slept on her own couch to avoid family conflict was now hosting dinners where everyone's comfort and dignity were respected. The grandmother who had funded her grandchildren's education while being treated like hired help was now mentoring scholarship recipients who appreciated her support and guidance. I had come full circle, but to a much better place than where I had started. The family I had chosen was more loving and supportive than the family I had been born into or married into. The work I was doing was more meaningful than anything I had accomplished in my teaching career. Most importantly, I had learned that it was never too late to reclaim your dignity, establish your boundaries, and create a life that honored your own worth as much as it served others. The circle was complete, and I was exactly where I belonged. As I write these final words, 7 years have passed since that Christmas morning when I woke up on my own living room couch and decided that enough was enough. I am now 79 years old, and I can say with absolute certainty that the decision to donate my grandchildren's college fund contributions to charity was the most empowering choice I made in the final decades of my life. The ripple effects of that decision continue to expand in ways I never could have imagined. The advocacy work I began has grown into a movement that has helped thousands of elderly people recognize and address financial and emotional abuse by their adult children. The workshops I started in my local community center now operate in 12 states, led by volunteers who have been trained in the principles of boundary setting and self-advocacy. My book has been translated into 3 languages and is used in social work programs, elder law practices, and family counseling centers across the country. I receive letters weekly from readers who have found the courage to establish boundaries with entitled adult children, to redirect their generosity toward more appreciative recipients, and to reclaim their dignity in family relationships. Harold and I celebrated our 5th anniversary as partners last month. Our relationship continues to be a source of joy, companionship, and mutual respect. We have created a life together that honors both our independence and our commitment to each other, proving that love and partnership are possible at any age when they are built on the right foundation. The scholarship program I established has now funded the education of 47 first-generation college students. I have attended 12 graduation ceremonies, watching young people achieve dreams that would have been impossible without the support that was redirected from my grandchildren's already adequate college funds. Noria, the first scholarship recipient I mentored, graduated with her master's degree in social work last year, and now works for the same nonprofit organization where I serve on the board. She has become like a granddaughter to me, but one who appreciates guidance rather than expecting financial support. "You taught me that education is a privilege, not a right," she told me at her graduation ceremony. "That lesson has made me work harder and appreciate every opportunity." This is the kind of gratitude I had hoped to inspire in my biological grandchildren, but had never received. Finding it in the young people I chose to support has been one of the greatest gifts of my later years. My relationship with Michael's family has settled into something cordial but distant. We exchange holiday cards and occasional phone calls, but the deep bond I once thought we shared has never been restored. Emma and Tommy, now 15 and 13, visit occasionally, and I enjoy these interactions, but I no longer define my worth through their affection or approval. Michael has never fully acknowledged the extent of his family's exploitation, though he has stopped asking for money and treats me with basic respect during our limited interactions. Jessica has made more effort to repair our relationship, but I have learned to be cautious about people who express remorse only after facing consequences for their behavior. The most important lesson I have learned is that family relationships, like all relationships, must be based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation. Blood relations do not excuse disrespectful treatment, and love does not require accepting abuse or exploitation. To every elderly person who is reading this and recognizing patterns from their own family relationships, I want you to know that it is never too late to establish boundaries, reclaim your dignity, and redirect your generosity toward people who will appreciate it. You are not obligated to fund your adult children's lifestyle choices. You are not required to accept disrespectful treatment in exchange for access to grandchildren. You are not responsible for solving financial problems that your adult children have created through their own choices. Your worth is not measured by your willingness to be taken advantage of. Your love is not demonstrated through unlimited financial support. Your value as a family member is not determined by your usefulness as a resource. To every adult child who might be reading this, I want you to understand that your parents' generosity is a gift, not an entitlement. Their time, energy, and resources have value, and they deserve to be treated with the same respect and consideration you would show to any other person who was helping you. If you have been taking your parents for granted, if you have been treating their home as your personal hotel, if you have been viewing their savings as your inheritance while they are still alive, it is not too late to change. But change requires more than apologies. It requires consistent, respectful behavior that demonstrates genuine appreciation for what they have given you. The journey from being an ATM grandmother to becoming an advocate for senior dignity has been the most meaningful chapter of my life. I have learned that trauma can be transformed into purpose, that pain can become the foundation for helping others, and that it is possible to create a new family from people who choose to love and respect you. I have also learned that saying no to people who take you for granted creates space for relationships with people who value what you offer. The money I stopped giving to entitled family members has funded scholarships, supported foster children, and helped abandoned elderly people, all of whom have shown more gratitude than I ever received from my own son and daughter-in-law. The couch I was forced to sleep on became a symbol of my willingness to sacrifice my own comfort for people who didn't appreciate the sacrifice. The charity donations I made in place of college fund contributions became a symbol of my decision to direct my generosity toward people who would treasure the opportunity. If my story has inspired you to examine your own family relationships, to establish boundaries where they are needed, or to redirect your generosity toward more appreciative recipients, then the humiliation and pain I experienced has served a purpose beyond my own growth. Your dignity matters. Your comfort matters. Your financial security matters. And you have the right to expect respect, appreciation, and consideration from the people you love, regardless of their relationship to you. The woman who once slept on her own couch to avoid family conflict is now sleeping peacefully in her own bed, surrounded by people who value her presence and appreciate her contributions. The grandmother who funded an entitled lifestyle while being treated like hired help is now supporting young people who understand that education is a privilege and generosity is a gift. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that elderly people deserve dignity and respect. And thank you for understanding that love should never require accepting abuse. Now go reclaim your own worth, establish your own boundaries, and create relationships that honor the person you are rather than exploit the resources you possess. You deserve better than a couch in your own home. You deserve better than being taken for granted by people who should treasure you. And it is never too late to demand the respect that should have been yours all along.